The Skaven, as a whole, fit the idea of rat men, with particular emphasis on the men part of that phrase. All named Skaven characters are male, and new fans invariably wonder, what about females? Where do Skaven come from? They are mammals, are they not? There was never any great emphasis placed on the females, and this is why. Indeed, they were left so ambiguous that the first ever description of Skaven females actually came about as a result of a fan fiction during the hoary days when gnomes and half-orcs were still canon. In The Book of the Rat, a fan-made netbook of Skaven lore for Warhammer Fantasy 1st edition, female Skaven were stated to be as sentient as their male counterparts, but hugely oppressed, kept as sexual slaves in some kind of segregated Sharia chamber of the Warren, to which only the clan's elites were allowed access. Female Skaven were described as rarer than male Skaven, partially due to biology, and primarily because their mothers and the bitter, infertile or elderly midwives tended to be particularly callous towards the female offspring, I suppose because they saw them as competition, and so the female Skaven would have a much, much higher mortality rate than males. Those looking for official lore had to wait until the first ever Warhammer Armies Skaven sourcebook was released, way back in Warhammer 4th edition. There, fans were presented with what is the earliest known mention of Skaven females, a single line describing them as being indolent and semi-intelligent, in the general Skaven entry, in the bestiary section. Modern lore, established in the Skaven 6th edition army book, and preserved since then, built upon this singular line, and is considerably more grimdark than the fan presented in the Book of the Rat. Female Skaven are horrific monsters, implied to be basically female giant rats of enormous stature, who build upon their description in the 4th edition by being described as feral, effectively non-sentient creatures. They're basically giant wombs, locked away separately from the males, and existing only to feed and produce offspring, so monstrously pregnant and indolent that their limbs have atrophied, rendering them incapable of doing anything but wallow in the breeding pits. Further female Skaven lore, such as it is, was fleshed out by the Black Library fiction, and most predominantly by the Children of the Horned Rat, a Skaven sourcebook for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd edition. In the Children of the Horned Rat, it's theorized that only 1 in 10 Skaven are female, reaching sexual maturity at the age of 2, and spending the rest of their 2 decades of life doing nothing but breed, averaging 12 to 24 pups a litter and 4 to 5 litters a year. What's explicitly stated in the same book is that Skaven females are not naturally mindless, but instead this is the result of the Skaven's malevolence and their need to improve upon nature. From a young age, Skaven females are constantly groomed and dosed with warpstone-based narcotics and hallucinogens, intended to keep them docile and segregated, so that they will not protest to their life of endless baby-making. There is a single line hinting that this may not be as effective as the male Skaven think.
So cloistered away from the rest of their race are they, that they do not learn their race's chittering speech, nor are they proficient in even the simplest social skills, or so the Skaven believe.
But still the vast majority of rat mothers spend their lives pregnant and in an interminable drug-fueled haze, often blind and or crippled, and dependent on the ministrations of the rat wives, castrated Skaven, who serve as nurses to the female Skaven themselves, and midwives to the endless litters. Access to the females is carefully guarded. The most powerful Skaven are allowed to own 1 or more females for their private use. Females are readily traded between clans as extremely valuable bargaining chips, and access to the communal females in the breeding pits is restricted to high-ranked or otherwise successful Skaven. In one of Gotrek and Felix's novels, a Skaven is rewarded by his superior by being given permission to mate with one, whilst in Thanquol's Doom there is a feature of a Skaven who partially lost their nose in an incident whilst mating with a breeder. Apparently she got too excited and tried to eat him, so he lost part of his schnoz. The female Skaven status as bloated, indolent baby makers is referenced in the End Times, in End Times Thanquol. A dwarf slayer separated from the other during the Battle of Carrack Eight Peaks found his way to a Skaven breeding pit filled with hundreds of females in such a state, their litters and a handful of rat wives. He killed the rat wives, the breeders and their litters, there being so many Skaven that the slayer's arms got sore from all the killing, the book describes. Then the slayer stumbled upon another breeding pit just as big, but by then Skaven soldiers had discovered what he did in the previous pit, so they swarmed on him and slaughtered him. The End Times is the most recent lore on this, so it looks like the baby factory fate is canon for most, if not all, female Skaven. It bears mentioning that the status of breeders does have some real-world basis to it. The rodent contains the only known eusocial animals, the mole rats, who live in colonies consisting of a single reproducing female, with one or up to 3 for naked mole rats, reproducing males reigning over a large brood of sterile offspring that work as a collective to survive. In these cases, however, there are equal numbers of males and females, and it's the presence of a breeding queen and her pheromones that causes sterility into the younger mole rats. If removed from her presence, they become fertile in turn and they can start their own colony. It also bears mentioning that in the Blood Bowl, the Skaven team comes with cheerleaders that are non-breeder females, which you can tell by them having 4 big breasts each. But then, Blood Bowl also has femme orcs, so its connection to canon of any edition is rather dubious. Fans being fans, and the natural appeal of Skaven as a beast folk race to furries. There have been many fans who find the fate of female Skaven to be rather disappointing to them. So there is an undercurrent in the seedier, steamier depths of the board TG on 4chan, which stands for Traditional Games, where fans like to talk about non-rat mother female Skaven. Many have rigorously tried arguing that given the reverence for the Grey Seers, combined with the chaotic tinge of the Skaven, there surely must be some rare female Grey Seers, because the Grey Seer thing happens via a mutation, who are thus spared the fate of their sisters. Others have pointed that since breeders are heavily dosed up with chemicals, then if that fate was spared for some reason, then a female Skaven would turn out to be at least as competent as her brothers. Still others note that Skaven can't resist tinkering, so it's not impossible that a Grey Seer or Master Moulder, even disregarding the female Grey Seer idea, might decide to make use of a thinking breeder, taking a breeder off the meds to see what use they could make of them. And in fact, this last argument has a dash of canon to it. In C.L. Werner's Grey Seer novel, Thanquol encounters a Grey Seer, known as Thratki of Under Altdorf, who owns 2 personal breeders that he has improved, granting them an unusual clarity of thought, freedom of motion, and rippling fast twitch muscle hidden under their chub, built like a cross between a breeder and a rat ogre. And they're essentially the Skaven equivalent of Amazonian bodyguards, which Thanquol is simultaneously horrified and impressed by, as he realizes that these harmless females would actually kill any Skaven who dared to threaten their mate, making them the ultimate bodyguards in the low-trust society that is Skaven civilization. All of these arguments are reaching, understandably, but it hasn't stopped fans from dabbling in femme Skaven homebrew characters, or even more racy artwork. One infamous Skaven-loving furry even created his own homebrew clan of renegade female Skaven, Clan Sneak, an offshoot of Clan Eshin, who scavenge in the outskirts of Skaven society and raid weaker warlord clans to steal away their females to bolster their own numbers of only female soldiers. Clan Sneak is also known to dabble with human men for pleasure and or procreative purposes, and there's even a named gutter runner female in a relationship with an imperial human. His artwork tends to pop up whenever a ratfolk thread does, and it certainly pops up when the topic of non-breeder female Skaven arises. Thus, the argument about whether or not rat mothers are interesting will probably rage forever.
Phenomenal, you wish you were.